The only solution is to just play a bigger game. You can't rely on your structures giving you a little boost. Your job is just to earn 1/3 more at least in your business to compensate for these changes. And there's no two ways around that. Like, you just need to earn more. You can do everything you like to try and avoid it, to try and bypass it, but ultimately you do need to make your business better.
Hey, the budget just dropped. What do I need to know as a general practice owner? And what do I need to be thinking about when it comes to this latest budget? Welcome back to the Scale My Clinic podcast. I'm here with Todd. Hey, Todd.
Hey, Sachin.
So, warning, this is not financial advice. Seek professional advice and expertise, of course. This is just two dudes telling you what we think. Or we might not be dudes even. Todd, welcome. There's a lot of info in the budget. We just want to focus attention to what's relevant to general practice. So what should we talk about today? What are the things we'll cover?
Well, the things we shouldn't talk about are going on political rants or segues. And as you rightly said at the start, not an accountant, not a lawyer, just a couple of people that have read through things. And of course, the devil will be in the detail. Right at this very moment, people in the background will be furiously negotiating the details. And if you're one of the big four advisory firms, you'll be negotiating with government and advising your clients on the side. So, we don't have the luxury of these things. We're just going to talk about it as we see it. So there are four big things, I think, Sachin, that are relevant for general practice owners. One of them is the new rules on discretionary trust or family trust distributions and a minimum tax rate being paid on those distributions, which doesn't act like an imputation credit, i.e. you can't get it back. The urgent care clinic funding is locked in. The other one was the capital gains tax discount disappearing and going back to what it was in the late 90s. And the remaining thing that's probably useful for people to know is there's been no change to the rules around commercial real estate, that all the rules represent residential real estate. And so it's probably useful for people that either already or aspire to own the property that their general practice runs from. Was there anything else you saw in there that might be relevant?
No, there might be a question from people who have property already asking about negative gearing. The bottom line with that was that it, if you already own a property up till 7:30 last night, then you just live by the old rules. And then after 7:30, 1 p.m. last night, you live by the new rules. And if it's new property, you can still negatively gear. But if it's not, then there's different rules. Again, the devil will be in the detail. They have released some detail, but that's more sort of general investment stuff than general practice owner related. So, but there will be many owners who have some property who'll be wondering. So that's probably the TLDR version. Long version is speak to your advisor. But let's get into what it means for general practice owners, Todd.
Yeah, so I think let's just deal with the urgent care clinic stuff first. That funding is locked in, and when they say they're a permanent part of the landscape. Look, the RACGP, for reasons unknown to me, really hate these. I don't really understand that. I mean, they're pretty well universally staffed by VRGPs. They provide a service that is frankly difficult to provide from general practices now. Treatment rooms are expensive to run. Most of the work that's done in these places either requires treatment room work, just a lot of extra support from nurse as well as treatment room supplies. They're mandatory bulk billing, and they are all attached to ED, so they all work to reduce the workload on emergency departments. They become a pretty permanent part of general practice now. In my experience, a conflict of interest owning one urgent care clinic. The issue is probably that a pool of doctors were pulled out of doing rural work where they would do emergency care in those environments. That is certainly an issue. It is now a different group of GPs that like doing this type of work. Some people do it 1 or 2 days a week just to add some variety to the work they do in a normal general practice setting. And there are a bunch of doctors that specialize in this type of work, just really enjoying the procedural elements and the more urgent elements. One thing I'll speak to is the number of patients seen per hour. and then I'll stop talking about this. These are not high volume environments. They're typically between 2.5 and 3.5 patients per hour. I've had that conversation with one of the largest providers. Very rare that they'd go above 3.5 patients per hour. And that's just due to the nature of the type of care that they are providing. And they are funded for not providing ongoing care. So therefore, reviews and telehealth consults are not possible as part of those environments. That does sometimes mean that GPs get patients back that haven't had all of the results discussed, for example. Unfortunately, that's a consequence of the type of care that is mandated with these. Let's park that. Urgent care clinics will continue. If you're unhappy about it, you're going to be unhappy for longer. If you're happy about it, your happiness will continue. Let's talk about something else. What would you prefer of those other three?
I reckon we start with CGT.
Yeah, well, so previously you had this 50% reduction after 12 months. And so that meant that if you're an asset renovator of some sort, that you could collect a pretty useful profit. And if you combined whatever you owned that profit, that vehicle in, that we generated the profit with a family trust, you had some either low earning or potentially young adults that are often the same thing as beneficiary of that family trust. You could stream those profits to them as well. And so therefore you could get a substantial reduction on the tax, and it ended up that sort of 25% to the 12 months was about the most that you've paid. The new rules say that 30% is the least you will pay on your future profits. And in many cases, it will be substantially more than that. And so this is definitely a shift. And I think the thing here that's probably good for us, Sachin, in regard to the work that we do with practice owners, building anything meaningful is a long-term job. And so if you look at the amount of time it would take you to get to that 30% tax paid on capital gains tax, then that would be, if we went to the RBA's 2.5% inflationary target, the middle of the band, after 12 years, you're at the 30%. Look, it's going to take you 8 to 10 years to build a meaningful business. We call them an asset, prices at the top that have margins of kind of 15% plus on gross billings. Those businesses are often valued at sort of 5, sometimes 6 times their earnings. Those businesses take 8 to 10 years to build. And so it's going to take you 12 years at the RBA's target to get to that 30%. Which is now the new minimum that you'll pay. And so the good news is slow and intentional builds of businesses are still going to be the same. We're not building the type of businesses. They're not software. They're not highly scalable businesses in terms of something that you can do in 12 months, 18 months, 2 years. You do need to build them out slowly because humans are a really important part of your team. And so I think from our perspective, what it means is the tax burden on small businesses is higher. Frankly, small business in Australia is a class that probably none of us want to be in, because you'd rather be doing transfer pricing like all the big guys, running a sales hub out of Singapore. If you're, the likes of IKEA, Google, Facebook, the big giants in mining, BHP, Rio, all these guys are paying bugger all taxes in Australia. The one group they didn't choose to tax are those that are taking our natural resources at very low cost. Often, sometimes we are subsidizing them taking it. They chose to walk away from all the tough stuff and just pound small business again. All right, that's my little segue into a rant. I'll bring it back in. But just slow and steady, I think, Sachin, is still the way here. The difference might be that your holding entity, most businesses now would be Pty Ltd, would be a company paying income, and that would usually have a franking credit attached to any distributions or profits that come to those shareholders. That's no longer useful through a family trust, because that 25% franking credit must be topped up to 30%. And then when it's paid out, it doesn't act like a franking credit. Effectively, that money will be pocketed, and the 30% is the minimum that you'll pay on that tax. It's not refundable in any way, apart from very specialized circumstances. So that's probably the other thing, is that the distribution structure for profits is likely to change, and that will depend a lot on the detail work that's being done here. Noting that there's a provision for restructuring a couple of years out from when these changes come in, which is 1st of July 2027.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I have some, some additional thoughts. Just on the rant side, I'll just say that this is, I was in England. I was born in England. Obviously, was there till 2008. There's a lot of echoes of the Tony Blair style policies here, where really they hammer small business, support big business, and almost want everyone to move from being a business towards being some sort of employee of a corporation, which I really don't like. This is just a wider societal thing. As small business sort of struggled in the UK, societal sort of strength also weakened, I felt, watching that. Small businesses are strongly invested in their local communities, and I feel that's much more than corporates. And so I think there are some genuine societal risks there that we need to think about beyond just general practice.
I think just one problem there is that small business can't afford to own a member of parliament, but big business, it's pretty easy to have your own personal member of parliament, and you can own them, and then they will do your bidding. You see that time and time again. But you and I, in small business, we really can't afford to have our own pets in parliament. Unfortunately, we just have to play the rules as they're served up to us. Back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think, when it comes to CGT and some of the other changes we'll talk about, I think restructuring may be actually a strong possibility. And then you may have, some different family structure which holds any capital gain in it and then sort of distributes it over your lower tax years, or your lower income years. And so I think there'll be some restructuring ability there that may also feed into one of the other big changes that we'll talk about. And so I think, some clever and wise accountants with the detail, once it's available, will be able to find ways that will mitigate some of the potential concerns here. And I think we should remember that these rules were created by people who probably want to find ways to also mitigate the harms of them on themselves. And so there will be, ways that the impact can be reduced. The other thing I think, again, one more rant, is for me, this just smacks of people in power, and it doesn't matter who they are, but it feels like there's a whole, probably over the last 20, 30 years, this whole class of professional politicians who haven't actually done anything outside. And so they make decisions based on study and political science and university education and roles as lobbyists and research assistants or whatever for politicians. And they can feel quite detached from the realities of, say, running a business. And then I think we're seeing some of that with some of the rise of populism and stuff, that people who get attracted to that are also feeling disconnected from the ruling class. And so reality is, if you're doing really well in business and you're achieving great things in private enterprise, there's not great incentive for you to want to be a politician anymore, I think, just with the amount of scrutiny and the knifing that goes on. So, but I think we're seeing some symptoms of that. People make decisions from an ivory tower. I'm not sure, other than the big four and those people who input ideas, I'm not sure where some of this thinking also comes from. But anyway, we have no power over that. We only have power to respond. And I think the reality is, if you want to do well in life, you can look at minimizing and avoiding or trying to reduce your tax burden. And that's important to do your tax planning. But really, you've got to play the positive game, which is focusing on what can I do actively in my practice to improve it, increase its performance, grow it, and create that true asset that you talked about at the beginning. And all of this is noise and distraction from that. So we've got to it's still important to plan for that, but we've got to work on getting our asset performing at its very best and getting the best return for it in the near term, and then in the longer term when we exit. And I don't think we should be distracted from that being the objective. That hasn't changed. That doesn't change. The mechanisms along the way may require a bit of refinement, but the actual end destination is the same, and it should just make us want to double down on that, because we're going to want that to be bigger, because a bigger part of it's going to be going to potentially to the government. And so we're going to want to create something bigger so we get a better return for the time, energy, and effort and investment we've made over that time.
That's the right focus, which is what do I need to build now to achieve the goals that I already had? What does it need to be and what does it need to look like? As you said, the accountants and the lawyers, it's their job to help with the vehicle. But I want to remind people that this is one of the most important conversations you'll ever have, structure of your interests. And you should be thinking not just 5 or 10 years in advance, but you should be thinking 20, 30 years long, particularly if this is really early on in your career in business. It does need to be fit for a lifetime. Understandably, things can change as they have now, and you need to adjust. But making poor decisions on the way that you structure your assets can cost you an absolute fortune. I've seen people do this poorly. And what I recommend is not only do you get a single opinion, but if you've got some questions that you'd like to have answered, write them all down and get 2 or 3 second, third opinions. Just as you would with a clinical health matter, you would probably go and talk to some other experts, because guess what? After these experts give you their advice, your backside's on the line for whatever you agree to. It is not okay to say, well, I didn't know I was told to do that. You do need to make sure that you're accountable for this, which means you need to have a background level of knowledge and understanding. And if you don't, that's okay. That's what those experts are for. Write every question down, go and interview them, share them in advance. My recommendation is that you never take up those free half-hour conversations or whatever. You just say, look, this is what I want to talk about. I think it's going to take 1 or 2 hours of your time. Let's book that in. I want to pay for that time. I'll send you my questions in advance. When you go, you might record the session just so that you've got everything you need to make sure you can move forward with confidence. Spending that money at the start is going to be really valuable. So that's even more important now than it was prior. And then, Sachin, if we had a timeline, like say you and I were going to go and set up a business now, set our first clinic up, and we were just starting small. So we're going to start something 4 to 6 rooms. My favorite business is an abandoned health or health-like service where I don't have to go and put all the plumbing and stuff in. I don't have to go and do too much other than a really light and fast fit out. Let's pretend we've found that 4 to 6 years. How far ahead should we be planning if I wanted to own real estate as well? What do you think is the right amount of timeline for me to have to generate the business of my dreams?
Okay, we're starting somewhere, but my aim in the end is to own that place or somewhere else where I can have the business. I think you've got to be looking a decade, 8 to 12 years. You've got to be, or maybe further. Like the longer you hold, the better you'll be in this new environment, and you'll have the ability also to do the McDonald's sort of play where you could exit, you could create the business, have a commercial real estate play, and then you could exit the practice or water down your holdings of that, but still retain the interest in the building. So there's lots of opportunities there. How about you? Do you have a set time frame?
Yeah, I think so. So the commercial property is untouched by these new rules, and so I think that becomes a stronger play. We've had this conversation before. I'm not a fan of people owning their business and the property right at the start, because you don't know how big your business can become. You don't know what your community needs yet. It's probably going to take you somewhere between 5 and 10 years to figure that out. So I think that the property you own should be the second property, not the first. And so, as you said, Sachin, you might have 4 or 5 years to get in and build something up. And 2 to 3 years from the end of that, first lease is when you should be looking externally for what you want. Holding that for 15 years offers substantial value, particularly if you're operating your business from there as well. There are other benefits will accrue down the line. So I think if you're kind of looking at a 12 to 20-year plan, and so the time horizon is often a little bit further than what people are thinking, but that kind of strategy where right from the start, you know what you're doing for the next 12 to 20 years, even if you did that with one practice, you're probably generating somewhere of the order of $8 to $12 million in wealth by doing that. If you did that in multiple locations, then obviously, that becomes a multiple. You're going to have to use much more aggressive gearing to do that. So operational excellence becomes more important if you're going to be gearing things up. And then the actual ownership entities of those, we're not sure what would be best for that at the moment. But that's probably what I'd be thinking is if you knew that over that period of time you could get your own personal exertion income as a GP. Obviously, the business profits would come through as well. And in that kind of smaller environment, they come through pretty quickly because it shouldn't be expensive. And then when you're building, you kind of have a fairly good idea about your revenue base, your existing patients, how easy it is for you to recruit people, all the kind of things that you don't know, those variables you've got answers to, and you can at least know the ballpark to. So I think if you put together a 12 to 20 year strategy that was around a single practice really, really killing it, that would be a really good plan. And that's a good idea to do that anyway. I actually don't remember looking that far ahead when I started, but I did build my entities. That could be the case. And certainly in most cases, I've owned the practices for that amount of time or more.
Yeah. I think the only other thing that's still a big open question mark, I don't know if you've seen any detail around it, is there were retirement provisions in the current CGT settings. And we don't know, there hasn't been any mention as to how those are going to change or not. One would hope that those retirement provisions in some way, shape or form remain. The fact they haven't mentioned it does make me concerned, that because it's a selling point normally. So the fact they haven't mentioned it does make me concerned that even the retirement provisions will be removed. And so that's, again, depending on where you are at the moment in your practice ownership journey, that does merit a conversation with your advisor and your tax advisor and financial planner if you have one, because that could substantially change some of your plans with regards to super and some of those other elements. Cool. So we've talked about CGT, Todd. Next one.
The family trust distributions are, I think this is just another reminder of what you talked about earlier. The price of passivity just got higher. By my calculations, what you miss out on is the tax threshold below $45,000 because it's a 30% minimum that the distributions will be paying, and there's no imputation credit on that. And so that amount is paid, and that's it. You can't get it back. I just did some calculations that the tax, that if you're a worker earning up to $45,000, you would be paying $4,287.84. The tax-free threshold is $18,200. Then the new amount will be $13,500 for up to $45,000. You don't get the benefit of any of those tax-free thresholds. So that means the amount is 9212.16. So if you had some non-working young adults, usually students, if you had 2 or 3, then you're obviously going to miss out on multiples of $9,200 based on the existing rules. If those people are earning $45,000 to $135,000 already, then there's no change. And once it goes above that, you're just paying the same as if the money arrived in their hands, which is how it always was. So there is a bit of a loss at that stage. Guess what, Sachin? I think what you're going to find is a lot of businesses have family members employed at $45,000 exactly per year. And then those distributions that go to them will just end up in exactly the same position. Plus, you can probably help out with some super and other things. And so I suspect that you're going to find a lot of family members on the payroll. And that is probably just how that's going to roll. Because when I always love when new processes or new systems are proposed, all of the evaluation assumes no response. My favorite for this was the UK sugar tax, where they had, hundreds of billions of pounds that they were proposing would be received for this tax. And when it actually came to deploy the tax, they got pretty close to zero because guess what? The marketplace adapted. You can argue that gave them what they wanted, which was, reduce sugar in these drinks. And what that meant was they got to collect very little of what they proposed. And this is probably a similar system here, is that there are other means by which money can be delivered to family members. One of the reasons that you build a business is for intergenerational wealth and to provide for your family. You take appropriate risk for that. What that means is those people are going to adjust to move the levers on this. And I think that's what you're going to see, a bunch of family members in there. But in terms of those distributions, you cannot get a clawback on that 30% minimum tax, which goes through via the family trust. And I think that looks like a hard and fast rule, and that may affect the ownership entity for these.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think entities will actually, be a real time to reconsider those. That we should be looking at our structures on a regular basis anyway, because rules do change. This is obviously the biggest one of the biggest ones we've seen for a long time. The other thing I observe about this is, and I feel that this is anti-family. So, just on my own example, maybe you've got similar. In our situation, we're here. We're the only people in our family here. We have no family support. So my wife and I made a decision early on, before kids were born, that one of us would work and do the business, and the other would take care of the home front. And this just puts a few barriers in place of that, which I think, again, has societal impacts, because what they're really, I think, trying to encourage is everyone to be an employee somewhere. But that might not be the choice that some families have made. And it just puts a bit of pressure again on to create a dual income family, where you may create a dual income family with a division of labor, which is a bit different. And that can have impacts on children and the way you choose to raise your family and raise your kids. So there are some societal impacts of that. And again, this is echoes of Tony Blair and the UK, the eyewitness. Again, people who historically had businesses ended up working for Tesco. And so, I've seen that firsthand, and it just reminds me very much of that approach. But I think I agree with you that there will be people who find employee arrangements, contractor arrangements, innovative ways to address this. But again, it distracts from the actual productivity of doing something, because you're having to restructure. But I think you've got to be smart about these things and take the right advice and from multiple sources, as you said, so that you can make the right decisions moving forward. The under 18s trust rules were changed ages ago, right? So what was it, $516 or something for an under 18-year-old? But then there'll be this group who've got, non-earning children between 18 and 20s, where that avenue now is closed off. And they've probably got to this point ready, just like, I can start to distribute. And now it all changes again. It's all part of the fun. What's your take on that?
I think, at the end of this, it all just comes back to one simple thing. This is not a time for passivity. You can't rely on your structures giving you a little boost. You just need to, you rightly talked about at the start, your job is just to earn 1/3 more at least in your business to compensate for these changes. And there's no two ways around that. Like, you just need to earn more. You can do everything you like to try and avoid it, to try and bypass it, but ultimately you do need to make your business better. And so that's actually not that hard to do. So that's the easiest avenue, I think, is just to say, you know what, I've been sitting on my hands for a while. I've been relying on some of these little things to boost the post-tax take for the family. That's not possible anymore. I now need to get in and just make sure that I earn the money for the government, and then enough extra that I'm not only not affected, but there's something in that for me as well. Because otherwise we're just kind of sitting around and complaining about it. And I think whilst that can be useful for a little while to kind of sook about things and complain, it's not useful as a long-term strategy. It's not useful as a medium-term strategy. You do need to get to getting some advice, get to knowing what it means for you. And then, as I said, the only solution is to just play a bigger game. And ideally you can get to be a big business where you can own your own member of parliament, and then you can directly influence decision-making. Aspirations is be on your vision board. Own an MP one day. It looks like the going rate is a plane. So what's the cheapest plane you can buy that you could give to an MP and claim that that's nothing to do with influencing?
Yeah, I think so. When it comes to practice ownership, we've seen multiple examples where people have, just by focused action, added somewhere in the region of 250 to 1 million in annual profit increases, depending on the size of their business. Doing that work, focusing on that, and knowing that, say you add, let's take 200,000 a year profit. Well, if you're going to own that for the next 10 years as a conservative, estimate, that's 2 million of increased income in that time frame. That's going to far outweigh the impact of some of these changes. And you've created something that, by creating a business that creates that much more income, the value of that business as a whole also increases. Whereas at the start, it may have been worth 3 times the earnings. Because you've sustained a higher level of, effectiveness and efficiency in the business and its productivity, the multiplier might be 5 times. And so you've created 2 million through, annual profits, plus the valuation of the business in total is changed as well. That's completely possible. And that's the thing that people, while we're angry or frustrated with the budget, we can forget to look at that opportunity. One of them we can control. The other, we don't have the plane to give to the politicians, so we can't control. And so it's okay to be annoyed and frustrated by the impacts of this, but then we really got to quickly switch our minds to, what can I do with what I have to make things better in terms of the results I want to achieve. And the best part of this in what we do is you can do all of that whilst having a bigger impact and doing more for your community and for our society, which is by doing our work better. And so that's what I love. We're quite lucky in that regard.
I think you're right. We're empowered to make that change. So I think for me, the take-home message is you still need to play the long game, but you can't play the slow game. You do need to get in, get proactive, roll your sleeves up and start improving the value of your business, which, to be frank, you should have been doing anyway. So I think that's the key, is you do need to just get in there and start ratcheting up the value of your business using tried and tested strategies. This stuff is, it's not easy, but it's also much easier if you have a guide and somebody who's been there, done it before. And ultimately, the audience of people we work with have done this many times. So I think that's the cool thing, is to know that you're not being asked to do something that's impossible, has been done before by other people. Therefore, it can be done by you if you're listening to this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you're listening and you've sat through the budget last night and watched Mr. Personality deliver it, sorry, that's a dig. But you've sat through that and you're just feeling frustrated or angry or irritated, or maybe you're happy about it, whatever you're feeling, let that sit. But now quickly think about, what can you do to make your lot better with what you already have? Because if you can focus your attention on the bits you control, then you're much more likely to achieve what you want, or in many cases, as we see, out achieve what you thought was possible. And that's where your energy needs to go. If you had any advice to people aside from what we've just talked about, what would be the next 1, 2, or 3 things you think, after listening to this, that people should do?
I think the first thing is to evaluate your business performance, irrespective of how these are going to impact it. Have a look at your business performance, and if it needs work, then you should get to improving that performance. I think it's the time for passivity is done. The other thing you need to do is stay abreast of the changes, make sure you read them, and book a time with your accountant to actually look at what the personal consequences for you are and any restructuring changes you need to make. You might want to get some advice from a second or third opinion as well. And then, as you rightly said, it's just about doing better, playing a bigger game. So this is probably, for some of you, the kick in the pants that you've needed to go, you know what, I'm going to have to just play a bigger game here. I can't rely on the structures bailing me out. I'm just going to have to earn more money and create a more valuable business. And that's the answer to most of these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things I've learned from experience and time and working with you, is what you just said about getting second and third opinions. Sometimes you'll get, if you've been with one advisor for a long time, you may get their passivity, which is, oh, don't worry about it, like, just carry on. Or the other is, they may tell you what you want to hear, that you can get away with something that maybe is questionable. And so actually deliberately looking for people, I think you say, that counter the advice of the first person who's advising you, just so you've got a wider perspective to then make the decision that feels right for you, is something I've learned definitely since working with you, Todd, that you talk about and do. And I think that would be really, really important to take on board at this stage. All right, so those are the next two things to do. And then, as my daughter's assistant coach says at soccer, it's time to get dangerous, which is do something. Like get in there and do something about it with what you can control and influence, and not focus on the things for too long that you can't control or influence, because that feels disempowering. And so we want to take a bit of control. All right, Todd, any last message before we close up?
I think that's it. Just do the work. It's really the message. Rely on passivity. So that's good. I actually don't mind things like that. They just force you to lift your game a little bit. It's like when you get a medical shock or something that you think, actually, you know what, I need to do better. Then this is the same. You just need to do better. You can write about it, and people will. You can see people going off in social media and whatever. But the reality is it doesn't matter. Keep an eye on the detail. Play the best game you can, and that's mostly about building something bigger than what was appropriate in the past. That's good. You've got the capacity and the aspiration to do that. The world is yours.
Absolutely. The likelihood is, as you're listening to this or watching this, you're sitting on more opportunity than you even know is possible. You just got to unlock it. And that's the next step. All right. He's been Todd. I've been Sachin. We'll see you next time on the Scale My Clinic podcast.
See ya.